Hello and welcome to the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary for March 2020. I'm Annie Haycock and I'll be telling you about some of the highlights for the month, including reports about a couple of field trips and the comings and goings of a few migrants. And this time I have help from Dave reporting from the GAN, Giselle and Richard from Scoma, and Sylvia and Nathan from Scoma. To start the month there was a trip to Fishguard Outer Breakwater. David Ramsey had organised it back in February, but it was postponed because of the storms. Finally, it took place on the 1st of March in blustery weather with sunshine and a hail shower. The outer breakwater is only accessible with permission from the Port Authority, so few people are able to visit it. We hope to see purple sandpipers and black guillemots. The sandpipers, 8 of them, showed well on the seaward side of the breakwater. These waders of rocky coasts rarely venture into the shelter of the estuaries. They are well camouflaged against the rock and the seaweed, and everyone appreciated the good views we had here. At the far end of the breakwater we sheltered from a hailstorm and admired a distant red-throated diver. In the sheltered corner of the harbour, a single winter-plumaged black guillemot swam and fished and preened at relatively close quarters. A pair has been seen here for the past 15 years or so, with a chick each year from 2008 to 11, but breeding isn't confirmed every year because of the access restrictions. Other birds in the harbour included cormorants, gulls and great-crested grebes, and a peregrine also appeared briefly overhead. February's stormy weather delayed the wardens getting back onto the islands. Nathan and Sylvia got back onto Scoma on the 6th of March, along with Catherine, the new visitor officer, Keris, the new assistant warden, and Rhian, the first of the season's long-term volunteers. They and a volunteer work party were soon busy preparing the island for visitors, doing routine maintenance work like repairing hides and painting walls. They still managed to find some time for bird watching, noting the return of wheatears and nest building by pied wagtails. And of course there were the puffins, some 30,000 of them by the end of the month. Castle Martin Course is a long marshy valley in the south of the county. It's usually a good place to see Marsh Harriers in winter, so Chris Taylor and Richard Ellis organised a bird group field meeting there. Unfortunately, the Marsh Harriers didn't oblige, perhaps because there were generally small numbers of the water birds they often prey on. However, we did see at least 60 snipe, though mostly they took to the air before anyone got a good close view of them. The highlight of the trip was a female sparrowhawk perched for several minutes on the edge of a sunken lane and seemingly unperturbed by our presence. She flew off, chasing a flock of 50 or 60 linnets. Dave Astins lives in a house overlooking the GAN. Here is his view of the month.
March was a funny old month. Arrived back from a trip to Canary Islands on the 2nd of March, and pretty much straight away we were all put into lockdown, so that made visits to the GAN the order of the day. Spent a lot of the month, as birds were mostly leaving, looking for colourings, and had some interesting sightings, although the month did start with a Slavonian grebe on the 3rd, which was a great record for the GAN and for Pembrokeshire. Managed to read the first colouring common gull at the GAN that I'd ever seen, which turned out to be from Norway. And as well as the usual Skocum ringed great blackback gulls, we picked up one that was ringed just close to Bardsey Island at Ynysgwynal, B162, which we subsequently saw twice later in the year, once on Dale Airfield and once out on Grassholm Island whilst doing gannet field work. The other feature of March was a bit of a passage of Brent geese. The peak was 49 birds in the middle of the month, which was more than had been present all winter, so a sign of things moving further north.
March is the last Webb's count of the season here, and numbers of most water bird species are generally low. However, there were some exceptions. On the Nevern Estuary, the flock of 258 common gulls were actually present on the count day. The last time a large flock stayed around was 200 to 300 in Angle Bay from January to March 1997. The highest ever single count was 360 on the Teivi Estuary in February 2011. Golden plover have usually left before the March Webb's count, but there were still over 2,000 around this year. Greenshank numbers remain high, 58 being the highest ever March total, with the previous record standing at 25 in 2007. Richard and Giselle eventually made it back to Scoma in the middle of the month, and here is what they found.
Due to rough early March weather, the Scoma team didn't arrive back to the island until the 16th. 2 wheatear had beaten us back, one of which was one of our green-ringed breeders. The next day saw an arrival of puffins to the coastal slopes, this the earliest ever landfall to be recorded here. 5,217 birds were counted that evening. The biggest count to have been made by this date in any previous year was just 200.
The 17th also saw 4 sand martin heading west. There have only been 3 earlier Scoma records, and 2 chiffchaff were in the courtyard. A hen harrier arrived on the 20th, as did 3 white wagtail. There have been 5 earlier spring wagtails, with 1 on the 11th in 1997, the earliest.
Chough were collecting nest material from the 23rd, and the first willow warbler arrived on the 24th. There have only been earlier willow warblers in 4 previous years. A firecrest and 2 black redstart arrived on the 25th, with 4 black redstart logged the following day when 2 red kite went over. This is just the second record of multiple kites on Scoma.
Although there was a well-documented movement of coal tits along the western side of the UK during March, for one to reach Scoma in the spring is exceptional. Nevertheless, one was near Gate Rock on the morning of the 28th. This only the 4th spring sighting since formal recording began here in 1933.
We'll finish with a roundup of the first arrival dates of migrants. These dates are from the bird sightings blog, so there may be earlier ones added by the time the 2020 bird report is published. The first wheatear was on the 6th of March, sand martins on the 13th, the first swallow on the 18th, but as they say, one swallow doth not a summer make, and there were only a handful of sightings during the rest of the month. A willow warbler on the 23rd, wryneck on the 24th. There have been 2 previous March records. Ospreys were seen on the 23rd and 25th. Ospreys are more often seen in the autumn migration, but there have been a dozen or so previous March records. A ring ouzel was photographed by Sash Toozer at the Deer Park on the 27th, and one was also seen on Scoma. The first cuckoo was also on the 27th. There has only been 1 previous March record. And Richard Ellis finished the month with a little ringed plover at Carew Mill Pond on the 31st. Well, that was March in a nutshell. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me for the April roundup of lockdown birding in Pembrokeshire.